from the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is AgDay.
Coming up today on AgDay,
this event goes back several generations, actually.
we celebrate a farming tradition with a little competition. We take you to this year's corn husking competition. What will it take for the dairy industry to win back customers?
If it's convenient, it's got a chance.
As the tides turn again in the China trade talks.
AgDay, presented by the Chevy Silverado and the all-new Silverado HD, the strongest, most advanced family of Silverados ever.
Good morning, I'm Betsy Gibbon. Clinton is on assignment. As the trade war between the U.S. and China goes on, new hopeful signs are moving the stock market. The Dow surging on Friday on hopes the two sides were moving closer to a deal. But that's after slumping for a time earlier in the week on word they had hit a snag. Here's the latest. USDA Undersecretary Ted McKinney said high-level China talks took place on Friday. Those talks included U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer, Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin, and Chinese Vice Premier Liu He. McKinney putting odds at better than 50% that there will be a signed agreement, saying, quote, the warming trend continues, end quote. National Economic Council Director Larry Kudlow also adding to the optimism, saying, quote, we are getting close, end quote. And former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger is weighing in, the 95-year-old speaking at the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations last week.
We should look at the present state of affairs as an inevitable transition. I expect that this trade agreement will be concluded in a positive way.
Kissinger went on to say the agreement should only be considered a first step in what could be a historic turning point between the two sides. And what about the new U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement? Democratic House Speaker Nancy Pelosi saying an agreement on improvements to the trade pact is, quote, imminent. She said the Trump administration and a working group she appointed regarding USMCA need to strike an agreement. Then implementing legislation would be written to move the pact through the House and the Senate. Many leaders have expressed a goal of getting it passed by the end of the year. The dairy industry is undergoing major changes, from the nation's largest dairy filing for bankruptcy to Americans drinking less milk. Farm Journal's Tyne Morgan talks to industry leaders about what they're doing to win back shoppers.
While DFA may be looking to buy portions of Dean Foods' business, the dairy co-op made another controversial move earlier this year.
When we started out, it was more of a purpose-driven sort of marketing campaign. These are great in smoothies. These are great in your coffee. This is great. But the flavor was so good that now it's more of like, this is something that you could have as your protein base, your plant-based protein, your dairy-based protein, plus the added calcium.
Dressler says the bold move has brought more people back to the dairy aisle.
I think it's increasing dairy demand. It's giving people an option to try different things that they may have steered away from dairy for a while.
Milk winning back over shoppers is something Plord says can happen, but in a different form than just a traditional gallon of milk.
If you look at it, for example, in China, Starbucks is opening a new outlet in China every 15 minutes, I've read. Well, there's a lot of milk that goes along with that stuff, right? So I think that coffee is a good friend for traditional milk.
He says the industry works to innovate new products, and it boils down to one key factor: convenience.
I've been studying consumers in one way or another for a number of years, and one of my rules is that never bet against the laziness of the American consumer. And we see it time and time and time again, that if it's convenient, it's got a chance. If it's asking the consumer to do a lot of work, it's really, really hard to get traction.
As consumers' tastes change, so is the world of dairy.
I would say the next 4 to 5 years, we're going to see huge, huge changes. Probably changes we haven't seen in over 1,000 years.
Aidan Connolly runs an artificial intelligence business focusing on dairy cows. He says dairy producers have to learn how to better manage their cows.
To answer the questions that consumers, I love the word prosumers, that prosumers, proactive consumers are looking for us to answer, to explain how we treat our animals, how we produce our food sustainably, what our carbon footprint is and all of that stuff, but above all else to make sure we're doing so in the right way at the right price.
He says customers are curious how dairy farms are driving quality and transparency on the farm.
So this transparency movement driven by
both sustainability and the power of the consumer through social media is the biggest trend in the dairy industry.
Connolly says if dairies don't embrace the change, they will become the taxis in a world of Uber or a movie store trying to fight Netflix.
But if you don't think differently, you will be disrupted, the business will be transformed, and you probably will be like the dinosaurs going out of business.
Disruptions that will drive change as the dairy landscape continues to shake up.
Another crop progress report will be released later today, which will show harvest pace. For southern Indiana farmers, it couldn't go any slower. Crop progress last week reading 66% of corn in the top producing states has been harvested, a double-digit lag. Soybeans not quite down double digits, but behind too. Farmers in southern Indiana say they are not used to receiving snow, especially in November. One farmer telling me he has 50 acres left to go, but some farmers are getting closer to the finish line as well.
A lot of farmers around here are either getting done with harvest or the end's in sight, but I think a lot of my friends are probably more mentally fatigued than they are physically fatigued this year. It's just been so much stress of trying to decide when you can harvest again and how wet you want to harvest your beans and your corn.
Brock Smith says yields are average to above average. He calls it amazing for the planting date and condition. A proposed bill would ban bacon and hot dogs from hospitals in Washington, D.C. The bill was introduced by a member of the Washington, D.C. City Council. It calls for the elimination of processed meats from hospital menus and would require plant-based options for patients, hospital staff, and visitors. The plan has the support of a nonprofit group called Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. The group's president saying, quote, "It's not uncommon for patients to wake up from heart surgery to be greeted with bacon and sausage, the very foods that have contributed to their health problems in the first place," end quote. Similar bills have already passed in California and New York. It's not just about trade wars and crop prices. One analyst says there's something else you need to consider right now. And later we do a little corn husking the old-fashioned way, but there's nothing slow about these competitors. The Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago says in its new ag letter that farmland values for the third quarter were 1% lower than a year ago. But a survey of 170 district ag bankers said values for good agricultural land were 1% higher from the last quarter. This graphic from the ag letter shows Wisconsin taking the biggest hit, losing 2% in the last year. Numbers from USDA show China purchased more than 760,000 metric tons of soybeans the previous week, but traders seem to be taking a cautious approach to any more news about China. Here's where we're starting the week from the CME.
Today in the grain market, soybeans were strong. The new export sales to China really helped the market give it a boost. The futures did start lower, then they found some support from the Chinese purchases. And also, we're thinking that what they're doing is really trying to fill the gap of the Brazil gap from what they purchased there. But we have to watch out for the trouble in Chile, because that kind of stalled the idea that there was going to be any kind of deal signed. Who would have thought that this was going to happen? U.S. and China were planning to meet in Chile to really start something, and I think that that's a big disappointment here in the markets, and that's why we're not seeing that big of a movement around.
A lot of the talk is focused around trade and commodity prices, but interest rates are also playing a big part in farm finances. Tyne Morgan has this analysis on what producers should be doing right now.
Here now with Tommy Grisafi of Advanced Trading. Tommy, when you look back at 2019, so much has happened, but when you watch interest rates, I mean, we thought they were going to keep going higher, higher, higher. Then we've seen these interest rates cuts, yet not seeing a big impact on the commodity market.
We've even seen a couple tweets from the president commenting on what he thinks or where he thinks interest rates should be or how aggressive we should be. So a few months ago, we started the process of lowering interest rates. They were going up. America's trying to get inflation, but we just can't get that big inflation number, like where we get scared and say, we have inflation, we need to tame this. Inflation comes from several things, the goods you buy, but it also mostly comes from the employment. And so wage inflation is also something that most people forget to talk about, and we have almost a fully employed America, but wage inflation's under control. Commodity prices are at what I would call multi-year lows, and so we're just not having that inflation. So the Fed cut 25 basis points, another 25, and another 25. And so here we took it up, we took it down. Farmers were concerned about inflation, or at least their interest rate. Their operating had went up. We're coming out of a 10-year move of having abnormally low interest rates, and they started to go up, but I think you'll be a little pleasantly surprised when you do your operating note next year that, you know what, my rate came down. And that's the least of your worries. 1% on $1 million is $10,000. You got to produce the bushels, and you got to find a place to sell them. So it's part of the equation. It's fun to watch. The dollar's moving. American stock market's at all-time highs, and that has nothing to do with what you're doing as a farmer.
You mentioned interest rates, and you know there were some real concerns, especially for those younger farmers, about what higher interest rates would do. Are those fears all the way gone now? I mean, if you're a producer still worried a little bit about interest rates and what could happen in the future, is that a real fear that you should have?
If you have that fear, which is, I hope we have inflation. I hope they have to raise interest rates. Going to do what the rest of the world is doing, creating negative interest rates, isn't something I think America should do. But if you are worried about that, it is so easy right now to term out debt, assuming you're qualified. But if you thought rates were going up, we're sinking right into all-time highs in the stock market and interest rates coming down. Those aren't two things you usually talk about at the same time. So if you were scared, take a break, talk to your banker, say, what are my choices? 5-year note, 10-year, where should I go with my money? How long can I borrow it? Let's term out some debt. I want to get back in that. I got scared that my interest rates were flexing.
All right. Thanks, Tommy. Not something we talk about. I mean, so focused on corn, soybean, wheat prices, where they're going. Haven't talked a lot about it.
It's all part of the business picture of finance.
Absolutely. Tommy, thank you so much. Let's take a quick break, and then we'll have much more right here on Ag Day.
Interested in spending a day with a trader? Call Tommy Grisafi at 800-664-4383. Join Andrew McRae for Farming the Countryside, a farmer-focused podcast that is all about production agriculture. Farming the Countryside is available wherever you listen to your favorite podcast and is brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions, the world's largest provider of crop inputs and services.
And welcome back to Ag Day on this Monday morning. We didn't see a lot of precipitation over the last week. Now this takes us from a week ago this past Saturday to this past Friday. And you can see there were some decent amounts parts of the southeast, especially northern Florida, southeastern Georgia. And then it was mainly lake effect early last week. And of course the amounts don't look quite as impressive as the snowfall amounts did, because once you melt the snow down, ends up not coming out to a whole bunch of moisture. But you can see it is still wet on the root zone. The latest one was from about six days ago. You can see from the northeast into the northern plains and up and down the Mississippi Valley, kind of wet. Some dry areas still mid-Atlantic into the southeast, and definitely dry areas Four Corner region, West Texas, western Kansas, all of this area expected to get moisture this week. Drought monitor also shows those dry pockets. They have improved over Texas. Four Corners hasn't improved, and the southeast has improved a little bit on the overall drought monitor. There's still some places that are severe to extreme droughts, but they really have been shrinking over the past several weeks. All right, here's the way things shape up. As we look at the jet stream, it's basically a ridge in the west, a trough in the east, but we do have this feature right here. And this folds in and brings a trough into the west for a short period of time, the middle of this week. This is going to have a lot of Pacific moisture with it, Gulf moisture with it. This should put down a fair amount of moisture, and it looks like it kind of stays there even a little bit as we head into the end of the week. But still, the troughs keep coming for the Great Lakes in the northeast, and these are shots of cold air. Not as cold as you saw early last week, but nonetheless colder than normal for the northeast half of the country. Temperatures this week, then, I'm going below normal from the central plains into the southeast, near normal northeast, above normal far west and south and southwest Texas. Precipitation this week below normal northern plains northwest, above normal then much of the southwest into the central southern plains, Ohio Valley areas near normal along the east coast. The 30-day outlook for temperatures still looks like a below normal pattern to me, northern plains into the northeast, down into eastern Texas, and above normal out west with that ridge remaining. South Florida probably above normal as well. 30-day outlook for precipitation below normal central plains, Great Lakes northeast, above normal southeast and southwest. That's a look across the country. Now let's take a look at some local forecasts. Heading to Boise, Idaho, first of all, partly sunny and milder, high of 61 degrees. Vandalia, Illinois, a mixture of sunshine and clouds with a high of 47. And finally, New Bern, North Carolina, a good deal of clouds today on the breezy side, high of 57.
A Nebraska rancher is at odds with some hunters. He says elk caused more than $100,000 in damage to his crops, so the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission granted him 50 deprivation permits to thin the herd roaming his land. According to the Omaha World Herald, some hunters aren't happy about it because only 374 elk permits were granted in Nebraska this year. The state received 5,300 applications. The Nebraska Game and Parks Director is defending the decision regarding the rancher, saying the agency needed to respond to the severe damage. Still ahead, we take you to this year's corn husking competition in where else but Nebraska.
Hey, stay tuned, folks. Coming up, I'm going to tell you about 4 really nice combines that sold late last week at auction.
What do you call someone who does dozens of jobs? A farmer. At Pioneer, we're proud to work with generations of American farmers in the most complex and rewarding industry on earth. So from your friends at Pioneer, thank you, farmers.
It's not too late to get a deal on good used combines, as Machinery Pete shows us.
Well, with harvest season grinding on here, folks, let's come up for air and consider how used combines have been selling. Now, I saw 4 really nice ones sold at auction late last week. Last Thursday on a farm auction in Heaton, North Dakota, this 2009 Case IH 7120 two-wheel drive combine, 1,750 engine hours on it, sold for $83,000. Now, it did have a little recent work done to it. And for perspective, the current average auction price this year on a 7120 combine, $74,934. Now, also last Thursday on a farm auction in north central Illinois, this very sharp 2011 Gleaner S67 combine with 1,175 engine hours on it sold for $95,000. Now, the day before that, last Wednesday, a little farther south, farm auction down in south central Illinois, this 2009 John Deere 9670 SDS with 1,748 engine hours on it went for $103,000. And how does that compare? Well, so far this year, the average auction price on a 9670 is $85,077. Now, also last Wednesday, over in west central Ohio on a farm auction, this really sharp 2009 John Deere 9570 SDS, 1,900 engine hours on it, sold for $102,000. Strong price there. For perspective, the average auction price so far this year on a 9570, $80,305.
Coming up, we celebrate a farming tradition and the people who do it all by hand. We head to this year's corn husking competition next.
Closed captioning is brought to you by BASF. Grow smart with BASF. We create chemistry.
They don't call Nebraska the Cornhusker State for nothing. The national and state contest for hand corn husking took place at Gothenburg recently. Reporter Brandon Cortez of NTV News in Nebraska has more on the final day of the event.
On the final day of the Hand Corn Husking 2019 contest, we learned more about the competition from different perspectives. It's not college football, but we still say go Cornhuskers, literally.
This event goes back several generations, actually. It started being a competition at the turn of the century.
The Hand Corn Husking 2019 Nebraska and National Contest brings in people of all ages for several different class competitions, from youths to golden agers.
This event really is, it allows people to be part of our agricultural legacy.
Part of that legacy is Roland Lauer of Gothenburg. He's been picking corn since the 8th grade. Lauer says he loved to pick so much, he'd go beyond his father's corn crops.
I tried to pick the neighbor's corn and keep on picking to the winter, as long as there's corn to pick.
Eventually, he became a corn husking competitor, but without being notified.
My sons signed me up. The first year that we had corn picking here, I wasn't in knowledge of it at all.
But he gives it a good laugh and says maybe he was too good not to sign up.
But I must have bragged a little bit too much of what I'd done in my past.
Lauer says he made many friends at events like these, but unfortunately some have passed. But him and his wife continue to make new ones.
I've enjoyed all the new acquaintances we made. It's terrific. We enjoyed every year.
And some of the youth may follow in the footsteps of Roland and others that came from 9 other states. Brandon Cortez, NTV News, Gothenburg.
The top female picker in the Women's Open was Nancy Miller of Manchester, Illinois. For the men, it was Ted Richard of Rochester, Indiana. Well, it's all the time we have this morning. We're glad you tuned in. For all of us here at AgDay, I'm Betsy Gibbon. Have a great day.